If you're ready to harness the power of your communications data, blast off with Nylas today.
Happy Friday, Ram.
Happy Friday, Ash.
Cool. Today is you've come up with a topic that is a personal favorite thing to talk about. So I'm gonna just try to get out of your way, but let you just jump into it. But definitely excited about this. So what are we going to be chatting about today?
Yeah. So today we're going to look at building and just kind of using GitHub Codespaces.
That's right. So yeah, GitHub Codespaces, right? I think you mentioned that for you, maybe it's been, your first touch point with GitHub Codespaces maybe a year or two ago. Whereas for me, I really started getting into it, I want to say about 6 months ago. And at least everything I've experienced with it so far has just been an absolute blast, really fun to develop with.
Yeah. So what we're going to go through is just kind of setting up an initial repo. We're going to do it all through GitHub on the web. And then we're just going to jump into how we can actually start a GitHub Codespace and what a GitHub Codespace is. And then we're just going to build up something with Nylas. So we're going to use Nylas's communication platform to connect to email and contacts and see how far we get with that. So let me just start sharing my screen and we can start talking about Codespaces. It may be easier just to see the flow and then kind of talk through it. So I'm just going to share my screen and we can get started. Awesome. So let's just start with GitHub itself. And I'm just going to show you the feature. I think it's features.codespaces. So you can definitely go here as well if you want to check it out. So that is at github.com/features/codespaces. And what this allows you to do is essentially open up Visual Studio Code in the browser and as well locally, but you're actually building off of a server in the cloud. So you're not actually building locally on your machine. So it's very similar to building locally on your own machine using Visual Studio Code. But in this case, all your processes, every command that you use is actually on a server. So it's running on a server in the cloud. And,
I was going to note that sometimes folks might know this as being kind of known as a thin client. So again, not everything's happening on your machine, but your machine becomes more of a window into things that are happening elsewhere. Although I will say that if that sounds constraining, the reality is it feels quite nice to use actually. So they've put a lot of work into that client side to really get it to feel great, in my opinion, to the developer.
Yeah, so let's kind of jump in and just create a repository so we can see what this looks like, because everything's available on GitHub itself. So I'm just going to create a new repository, and I'm going to create it on my own account, and I'm just going to say test out GitHub Codespaces. And here we're going to have trying out GitHub Codespaces, building with Nylas. So I'm just going to create a public repository. And for now, I'm just going to initialize the README. And one thing I noticed, I know, Ash, we were talking about this yesterday, is you can actually add templates based on your environment. So for now, I'm just going to try adding the node template to see what that looks like. And it's always useful to have a git ignore, and you'll see this when you start installing any node modules or npm packages. You want to ignore the actual installation, so you're not having to commit that to your Git repository.
That's right. And that'll probably also, in case you end up using things like .env environment variable files and things like that, it'll just make sure that those kinds of things don't end up in your source control.
Yeah, so far, all we've done is we've just kind of got started with creating a repository. And once we've actually created the repository, if you take a look in towards the right-hand side, you see the code tab. Here, you can actually start running this code or start building using Codespaces. So we can create a code space on main. And so main is the branch that we're going to work off of. So let's go ahead and do this. And what this is going to do is it's going to set up an environment in the cloud for us to start building in the browser settings, so we can actually open up a version of Visual Studio Code. And what's interesting with Visual Studio Code is actually built using web technology. So it was built using a responsive or a modern framework like React. So it can actually be easily embedded inside of the web as well. So before we dive in and start looking at code, let's quickly look at the terminal and see what it says here. So it says, welcome to Codespaces. You're on our default image. So you can actually configure what the server will look like and what the server configuration will be. But for now, we're just going to use the actual initial configuration that we have here. And this contains a few things for us. And we're just going to be spending time in the node environment. So we can check if everything is ready to go by typing in node-v just to check the node version. And as well, we have an npm version, so we can start installing npm packages. So all of this is happening on the actual web. You're not actually running anything locally on your machine. You're actually using your browser and instance of Visual Studio Code on your browser. So one thing to check out is we can quickly take a look at the git ignore. And I guess one thing we want to make sure is that it has node modules here. So we can quickly look for node modules. So it does have node modules added. And another thing we want to check if there is any M file, and we'll touch on this in a second, but it's always good to check that the M file is included or actually ignored from Git, from your Git commit. So it should be included in your git ignore file. And the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to instantiate the project. And to do that in a node environment, we're going to do npm init. And it's going to ask you a few questions. And one way we can jump through the questions is just by doing -y. So it's just going to answer yes to all the questions. So once we actually have a package.json, we can start installing npm packages. So I'm just going to show you the npm package, the package.json. And now we're going to start installing packages here and start building in a browser environment. So we're going to install 2 packages, and we're going to first install a .env package, and this is going to let us access environment variables. So we're going to do npm install .env. So this is going to install .env, and as well we're going to install Nylas. So we're going to do npm I Nylas. So Nylas has SDKs for building with different libraries, and I think it's lowercase. And it also has a Node SDK, so you can build using the SDK or the Node SDK client. So if we take a look at our package.json, we have 2 packages installed. So we've all done this through the browser, and we're able to start building on index.js or on our initial file. So I can create the index.js here. So here we can start importing files or importing our libraries, and we can start coding and building functionality using the Nylas API using Codespaces. So I guess the first thing we would want to do is we would want to import our .env file. So we would do .env/config. And as well, we're going to import Nylas. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to import 2 things from Nylas because we're going to be working with contacts and emails. So we're going to import the contact class and as well the email address class because we're going to start creating contacts using emails that we receive from Nylas. Turn this off. Okay. And this is going to be from Nylas /lib/model/contact.js.
Looks like you have an extra from right there. Front. Yep, there you go.
I think I'm used to having a code styling done for me or prettier installed. So we'll leave that part out for now. But let's go ahead and configure the Nylas client. And what this does is it allows you to access functionality within Nylas. And all we're adding here is we're going to be adding 2 pieces of information. We're going to add the client ID, and we're going to also add the client secret. Before we go ahead and add this, we need to kind of talk a bit about how do we access environment variables. And environment variables within Codespaces is available to you. So you can actually access them using .env. So .env will attach any environment variable to process .env/client ID. But we actually need to define client ID somewhere. And there are a few ways we can define the client ID. And I guess the best way to show you how to do that is to show you through the actual UI for GitHub. So in GitHub, if you go to your repository and then you go to settings for your account, and inside settings, if you go to Codespaces, you'll see that you can add Codespace secrets. So here I've already added the environment variables that I'm going to use, but you can also add a new secret here as well. So you can add a secret name, and then you can have secret value.
And if I remember correctly, these are encrypted once you put them in, right? So like once you've hit that add secret, like you won't be able to get that value back. Is that right?
Yeah, so what's going to happen here is once we add it, this is actually a one-time. You can see it. This is the only time that you can actually see it unless you remove it and add it again, or you decide to update it. So once we have the name and the value, we're going to go ahead and decide which repositories we want to access this. So we're going to add it to the recent repository. So test out GitHub Codespaces. You can select which repositories have access to which variables, environment variables. And this is really powerful because you can start sharing environment variables across different code spaces. So here we've just added secret name. And as you can see, you can't actually see the value. You can only update or delete it. And we can access these environment variables within our actual code space. So I'm just going to try to access this value right now. So inside the terminal, one thing that pops up is it shows you that your code spaces has the secrets have changed. So you'd want to reload that so that you can actually see the changes. I'm not going to do that for now. It may take a few minutes to reload because it's actually restarting the Codespace server. But what we can do is we can actually access some environment variables that we've already created. So one environment variable that we've created is a client ID. And this should show you the actual client ID. Oh, it's interesting. I think it's showing it, but I'm not able to see it.
And that, who knows, that may be intentional, right? Because again, the idea that you would want to print that into your terminal. But let's have a look and see if it's if we take it for a spin, if it'll work in the code.
Yeah, let's try running the code. So I'm going to add in both environment variables. Client, I think it's client secret. So we have client secret as well. And these variables are going to be available through the Nylas dashboard. So I just want to show you where you can find that in the Nylas dashboard. So if we go, so in the Nylas dashboard, we're going to log in, and you can create an account for free. And I have many applications here. I'm just going to show you one of the applications. So it's going to be the Quick Start app or the first app that you create. And if you go to app settings, so app settings on the left-hand side navigation, you'll see a client ID and a client secret. And these are values that you want to bring over to your environment variables or set up in your environment variables so you can actually access the Nylas client or set up the Nylas client. So I'm just going to clear my terminal and let's try running this to see what happens. So I'm just going to do node index.js. I get this warning. So I just want to read through this warning. It's saying to load an ES module, we need to set the module type, the type in the package.json. So we need to set this up so we can actually use or set up the package.json so we can actually use import. ES6 import style imports within Node. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that.
And that's because by default, the way that you would pull in your dependencies in Node today is going to be by using require calls instead. But to be able to use these, what are the ES5 modules, I guess, or ES modules, sorry. Yeah, you've got to be sure to set that in your package.json each time.
Oh, so we have import Nylas. I don't know how this client secret got added here. I think it's a typo. We're just importing Nylas and the .n file. We're going to import contact and email address. Let's try running this again. And everything seems to work so far. So I'm just going to add a few more lines of code so we can just show any messages that we received. So I'm going to set up Nylas. I'm going to set up Nylas with an access token. And again, you can grab the access token using the actual Nylas dashboard. If we take a look at a Nylas again, I'm just going to jump over to Nylas. For any of one of your accounts, you can actually use the connect an account feature. And this allows you to actually connect a user account and receive access tokens. So I went ahead and already did this. So I do have an access code token available to me. So I'm going to set up the access token, the Nylas client with the access token, and I'm going to try to actually retrieve messages from Nylas. So this is going to be Nylas.messages. Let's go ahead and try to run this. It says the function requires an access token. I think we have an access token here. Process.m/access token. Oh, promise.all.
Yeah, it could be that since we were playing around with the variables inside the GitHub UI earlier, that the reload might be unavoidable.
Yeah, let's try reloading this. I think I can do it from the actual shortcut command, but I'm going to try to, can I type in reload window? I think that should do it.
That's super interesting. We were talking a bit earlier about that command palette in VS Code, being able to reload the window. Makes sense. Not something I've ever thought to try before.
So we should be able to access client ID. It doesn't seem to print it out. So I want to try running this code again. I think it's saying that, just moving this over here. It's saying that the environment variables are not available. So I just want to double check why that's the case. So process M, client secret, client ID. We have our access token. Let me take a look at the code spaces. So I think I know why now. So if I refresh this, what happened here is the access token needs to be available for the repository that we're working in. We only have secret name available. So let me just try to echo this out in the terminal. This is always the fun part where it should show this value, but it's not showing it. So I want to try to console log it out. I'm just going to do that quickly. So let's do console log process.m, and we're going to do secret name. Okay. So it says undefined. So I'm curious if it's added to the correct repository. Let me take a look.
That may well be it, because since all of these secrets have access to one repository, but you just showed us how to create a new repository. That's quite likely the issue. So
test out. Let's select repositories. I think it's added to this repository. Yeah. So this secret name exists. Okay. Let's try updating another value. Let me see if I can update the access token. The project is going to be test out GitHub Codespaces. Okay, save changes. And let me add it to the actual client ID. Okay, we're going to do one more with the client secret. So these are all the Nylas environment variables that we need to add. Test out GitHub Codespaces.
And by the way, this tight control over which repos have access to which secrets and that sort of thing is really a very good thing, right? So in other words, like I think when I first got started with Codespaces, one of the things I worried about out loud on Twitter, as a matter of fact, was precisely this, which is if I store those secrets, how am I able to make sure that, they're very tightly defined on what has access?
Yeah, so I think just reloading it and adding it to the right repo worked in this case. So we got client ID showing. So for now, let me just try to show what happens when we try to retrieve messages. And we can go from there. So we're able to access our access tokens. And now we're just going to go ahead and run the command and see what happens. And nothing is returned. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and show the messages. And I think here, since this is an async call, I'm going to try grabbing the first few messages. Let's just try to show the first few messages, and we'll console log out the first message for now. So we'll just do emails, and we'll take the first item in the array. So what we're doing here is we're taking messages, and we're listing the first three messages, which would be emails, and we're limiting it, and we're just going to show the first one. Let's try running that, and we need to have, let's call it Nylas messages. There we go. There we go. So we're able to actually connect to the Nylas CLI using the credentials, and as well, we're able to display the first three messages. So here is a lot of JSON being sent back to us in the terminal. So one thing we can grab from it is if we wanted to grab the subject. So for example, I could just do subject, and we can print out the subject that's returned to us. So this is showing a critical security alert. So this was the subject that was sent out to us. And I don't think that's the case, but that was the subject in that.
Always a nice message to get on a Friday morning,
especially during a live stream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was kind of a full walkthrough of using Codespaces, being able to, let me stop sharing. Yeah, using Codespaces, being able to set up a repository in GitHub and set up your environment variables, and as well just highlighting the security feature, making sure you add the right repository to the environment variables or the secrets.
Strongly highlighted in this live stream, but hey, that's how these things go. So I'm glad we were able to poke through with that, because I think anyone, like whether you're starting out, again, I had questions about it, but also if one doesn't have questions about it, there's sort of pitfalls you can walk into as well. So hey, I have here's a thing to end us today, which is like, okay, you just did a bunch of code in the browser in VS Code on a thin client connected directly to GitHub. And that is really sort of like an interesting, I guess, tech demo, possibly on it at worst, but why should we care about that? I have some thoughts on this specifically, but I'm curious, like if there's anything that you found particularly compelling about Codespaces.
I think this has been something that I think I've been toying with and thinking about for a very, very long time. And I think one of my first projects, we were talking about this offline, was building a mobile code editor and just being able to build on mobile and just having this in the web. I think the web is probably one of the best or universal user interfaces out there. And having this experience, being able to do it on different environments. I know yourself, you've been doing it on an iPad, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's right. And so, well, yeah, I'll show you, like, because I always just kind of have my iPad sitting around off screen anyways somewhere. But like, yeah, if you have an iPad with one of these keyboards on it and you're a developer, like probably at some point you're going to think, geez, I sure wish I could code on this. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but that certainly felt like that for a long time. And there's just, I think for policy reasons, a lot of things that developers building native apps can't give you in terms of a developer environment on an iPad. So this kind of solves for that in some interesting ways. There are a couple of limitations, mostly to do with resources available to a Safari tab. I've noticed that you end up needing to reload the code space more frequently, for just as one example. But having said that, I don't think I've ever lost work having to do that. So again, like there's just some amazing things that the Codespaces team have done to make that all feel right. And perhaps one other, I'm thinking, one other potential kind of benefit of this, besides coding on the iPad, which I will admit is probably pretty niche as a desire. One thing that probably is less niche is just the ability to get, teams or up and running without that sort of it works on my machine problem. This ought to help with that. And I'd say, especially for folks like you and me, Ram, if we're here to like help developers build cool stuff on an API platform, now this gives developers a way to show up to, say, our sample repos and kind of run all that stuff like in the browser in an environment that we've put together for them. So it's just a lot less setup just to get started and have some fun.
Yeah, I think this is an awesome way to kind of make it easier to get started without having to kind of hit those first few hurdles of like, oh, I need to install this or I need to set that up. You can just kind of get running right away.
All right. Well, I love this topic. Maybe we'll do a little bit more of it at some point, because I think there's just still lots of fun things to play around with here, and we've barely scratched the surface. But I think one of the main takeaways is look how normal it can be to just like go to a GitHub repo in your browser, click the code tab, which used to just be where you would get like the clonable URL, but now there's like more stuff there, and you can click one thing and boom, VS Code's open, and you've got a terminal right there. So just the sheer normality of the whole environment, I think alone is an interesting takeaway, but there are other things that we can dig into later on if we choose. So thanks for bringing this topic today, Ram. Really fun one for a Friday.
Yeah, this was great. And feel free to kind of subscribe on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Nylas /C/Nylas and follow along. We'll have more videos like this coming out soon.
Yep, we do a couple of them every week. So always feel free to let us know in the comments or anywhere else if you have things you want us to talk about. We'll make sure to get to that.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.